Assalamu alaikum. The title of this lecture is The Innocence of Sissy. Students, as you know, last time we started discussing the second section of Sewing, showing that the opening scene of it is at Gradgrind's school that shows his educational philosophy of facts. This philosophy focuses on teaching the students factual lessons and subjects and discarding lessons that are related to fancy and imagination, such as arts, poetry, novels, etc. We have seen how, of course, Sissy Job, student at Gradgrind's school, has been rebuked for mentioning things related to or things against the principle of this school, such as calling herself Sissy, not Cecilia, and mentioning the circus where her father works. Let us now continue tracing the events of this scene to see how Mr. Gradgrind is going to manage things at his school. The third gentleman now stepped forth, a mighty man at cutting and drying. He was a government officer in his way and in most other people's too, a professed pugilist, always in training, always with a system to force down the general throat like a bullets, always to be heard of at the bar of his little public office, ready to fight all England. Students, as you know, in analyzing the first section, the one thing needful, we said that there is a third person who attends the lesson of the children, and that person, the name of and the identity of this person are unknown to us, are not revealed. Here, the narrator describes this unknown person and reveals to us who's this man. He is a government officer, which means that he is a man of authority. He makes a visit to this school, to Gradgrind's school, to be sure that children have been taught facts and factual matters. He is described here by the narrator as a hateful person, unpleasant, unkind, and arrogant. Very well, said this gentleman, briskly smiling and folding his arms. That's a horse. Let me ask you, girls and boys, would you paper a room with representations of horses? After a pause, one half of the children cried in chorus, yes, sir. Upon which the other half, seeing in the gentleman's face that yes was wrong, cried out in chorus, no, sir. As the custom is in these examinations, of course no. Why wouldn't you? Listening to Bitzer's definition, the visitor seems to be, the gentleman, by visitor I mean the gentleman, seems to be pleasant and satisfied. He praises Bitzer for his definition that lacks realities and perception, since it is a mere scientific knowledge. Now the man begins examining the students' knowledge. He asks them whether they would paper their rooms with representations of horses or not. The first half of the students says yes. They show their agreement. The other half of them says no. They disagree to paper their rooms with representations of horses, and their disagreement is based on the face reaction of this man, who has frowned when he showed dissatisfaction with the yes answers. You must paper it, said the gentleman. You must paper it, said the gentleman rather warmly. Yes, you must paper it, said Mr. Gradgrind, Thomas Gradgrind. whether you like it or not. Don't tell us you wouldn't paper it. What do you mean, boy? I'll examine to you then, said the gentleman, after another and a dismal pause. Why you wouldn't paper a room with representations of horses? Do you ever see horses walking up and down the sides of rooms in reality? In fact, do you? Yes, sir, from one half. No, sir, from the other. Of course no, said the gentleman, with an indignant look at wrong half. Why then you are on not to see anywhere. But you don't see, in fact, you are not to have anywhere. But you don't have, in fact. What's called taste is only another name for fact. Thomas Gradgrind nodded his approbation. Now, what do the yes and no answers show here? What do the varied, of course, replies of the children show? The varied replies or answers of these children show that they are not sure in saying no, but they are obliged to say it because they look at the gloomy face of the visitor and say no. In other words, the man shows disapproval. He becomes furious when some students say yes and other students, I mean, have been, and it seems that other students have been affected and made their disagreement. Ultimately, this shows that they are confused, they are not sure whether they can or they cannot, of course, paper the, the rooms with the representations of horses. Now, of course, the visitor tells the students that they cannot paper their rooms with representations of horses, since in reality, horses do not walk on walls and do not live in bedrooms. This is entirely funny and ridiculous. Through this visitor, Charles Dickens criticizes and mocks at the rigid thoughts of course, the educational system of this school. Now, how do you look at the scene here? The scene here is full of humor and satire. The humor and satire are embodied in portraying the visitor and Mr. Gradgrind. The visitor negatively responds to the answers of most of the students. The yes and no answers make this person, of course, seem funny and not respected, sorry. Even those who say yes seem to be afraid of him. Humor is also achieved through Mr. Gradgrind's reaction. His constant agreement to what is said by the visitor, whether wrong or right, makes Gradgrind seem like an echo or a parrot, repeating the words of the visitor without thinking of them. Girl number 20, said the gentleman, smiling in the calm strength of knowledge. Sissy blushed and stood up. So, would you carpet your room or your husband's room if you were a grown woman and had a husband with representations of flowers? Would you? Said the gentleman. Why would you? Now the visitor looks at Sissy Jup and asks her if she were a married woman, she would carpet her room with representations or figures or pictures of flowers or not. Let us, of course, see the answer of this poor girl, poor innocent girl. If you please, sir, I am very fond of flowers, returned the girl. And is that why you would put tables and chairs upon them and have people walking over them with heavy boots? Of course, replies the gentleman, or said the gentleman here. So the first line is said by Sissy Job, the second one is said by the second and third line, or the second and third lines are said by the gentleman. It wouldn't hurt them. This is the reply of Sissy Job. It wouldn't hurt them, sir. They wouldn't crush and wither. If you please, sir, they would be the pictures of what was very pretty and pleasant, and I would fancy. But you mustn't fancy, cried the gentleman, quite elated by coming so happy to this point. That's it. You are never to fancy. You are not Sissy Job or Cecilia Job, Thomas Gradgrind solemnly repeated to do anything of that kind. Fact, 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 said the gentleman. And fact, 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 repeated the echo, Mr. Gradgrind. The answer of the girl here, as you see, shocks this gentleman who, of course, who encourages the philosophy of facts, and he sees that it is the best way in teaching the children at this school. Sissy says here that she would carpet her room with pictures of flowers, an answer that makes this man be very angry. He mocks at her and he says that tables and chairs would be put on them and visitors or people would walk on them. The girl replies that they would not be hurted since they are just pictures. They are not real flowers. Again, her reply shocks the man who makes, of course, a reply that makes him lose his temper. Now he becomes out of his temper. He tells her that she is here not to fancy, but to be filled with facts. You are to be in all things regulated and governed, said the gentleman, by fact. We hope to have before long a board of fact, composed of commissioners of fact, who will force the people to be a people of fact and of nothing but fact. You must discard the word fancy altogether. You have nothing to do with it. You are not to have in any object of use or ornament what would be a contradiction in fact. You don't walk upon flowers in fact. You cannot be allowed to walk upon flowers in carpets. It seems that it is difficult for Sissy Job to think according to fact and, of course, to depend on facts in everything. She cannot detach herself from her fancy and fanciful way of looking at things. She is very kind, of course, human and sensitive. Ultimately, these features do not satisfy this visitor and Mr. Gradgrind, since, of course, they do not make a person, since they believe that such features do not make a person believe in facts. In other words, such features encourage fancy, creativity, and imagination, which are against the aim of this school, a school which is based on facts and factual matters. Therefore, the children here have to be regulated and dominated by facts only. So the main aim of this gentleman is to make all people in Cocktown believe in facts only. The scene here, of course, shows the negative influence of the Industrial Revolution that affects that negatively, of course, affects the lives of the Cooktowners. I mean, those who live in Cooktown, they are presented here as figures. The children of this school are presented as figures or as machines released from their emotions, such as pizza. The educational system hinders the development of the emotional side of the children. System that, of course, needs them to be figures and machines without passions. Thank you for your listening.